The Kepler Academic Nexus prided itself on being the galaxy's premier institution for xenobiological studies, which was another way of saying it was where young aliens came to feel superior about other species while their parents paid exorbitant tuition fees. The morning air recyclers hummed with their usual mechanical indifference as Instructor Vex 9 prepared for what should have been the most mind-numbingly routine demonstration of the semester. Vex 9's crystalline form caught the artificial light in ways that suggested both geological patience and barely contained irritation. The crystalline species had evolved from living rock formations, which explained their methodical approach to everything and their tendency to treat organic life forms as fascinating but ultimately temporary inconveniences. Today's bioscan analysis will focus on tissue samples from recently cataloged species, Vex 9 announced to the scattered assemblage of students who represented what the Nexus generously called the finest minds in the galaxy. The finest minds, it turned out, were currently more interested in their personal data tablets than in the finer points of genetic classification. In the third row, Zephyr Cole, a gaseous collective entity currently maintaining a vaguely humanoid shape, pulsed with boredom colors. "Professor, why are we still studying extinct primitives? The Mid-Rim Archaeological Survey already categorized most of them as irrelevant." "Because," Vex 9 replied with the patience of someone who had explained this concept roughly 17,000 times, "understanding evolutionary dead ends helps us appreciate the superiority of successful adaptive strategies." Several students managed expressions that suggested they found this reasoning both obvious and beneath their intellectual station. The bioscan unit hummed to life with the enthusiastic efficiency of technology that had never questioned its purpose. Vex 9 selected the first sample from the containment field, a small tissue fragment from a recently discovered world on the outer spiral. "The scanner will analyze genetic markers, evolutionary indicators, and threat assessment parameters," Vex 9 continued, placing the sample in the analysis chamber. "Note how the readout provides immediate classification data." The machine chirped pleasantly and displayed results that caused exactly zero excitement among the student body. Species classification, 7 Delta, evolutionary status, terminated, threat level, negligible. "Predictable," muttered Nexar, a three-eyed trilopod whose species had mastered interstellar travel roughly around the time most planets were still figuring out fire. Another failed carbon-based experiment. Vex 9 moved to the second sample with mechanical precision. This one came from a world closer to the Galactic core, more developed, but still comfortably inferior to current galactic standards. Species classification 4 Gamma, evolutionary status, stagnant, threat level, minimal. The third sample produced similar results, as did the fourth and fifth. The students' attention drifted toward more pressing concerns, like upcoming social events and the cafeteria's persistent inability to properly synthesize Alterian nutrient paste, which was why nobody was particularly prepared when Vex 9 placed the sixth sample into the scanner and the entire facility decided to have a collective nervous breakdown. The scanner's pleasant chirping transformed into something that sounded like mechanical screaming. Warning lights that hadn't activated in decades suddenly bathed the classroom in aggressive red pulses. The air itself seemed to thicken as emergency barriers materialized around the scanning unit. "What the blazing void is happening?" Nexar demanded, his three eyes spinning in different directions as he tried to process the chaos. The scanner's display flickered between readouts so rapidly that individual data points became meaningless blurs. Finally, it settled on something that made even Vex 9's crystalline composure crack slightly. Species classification. Unknown evolutionary status. Error. Data corrupted threat level. Maximum containment. Protocol. Initiated facility. Lockdown. Active. A synthetic voice filled the room with the kind of calm authority that suggested imminent doom. Emergency Protocol 77, Alpha activated. All personnel remain in current positions. External communication suspended. Security en route. Zephyr Cole's gaseous form rippled with panic colors. Protocol 77 Alpha? I've never heard of that one. That's because it's never been used, said Thrix, a multi-limbed arachnoid whose species specialized in information synthesis. I accessed the Emergency Protocols database for my thesis on institutional preparedness. 77 Alpha was theoretical. The classroom's exits sealed themselves with the distinctive click-hiss of quantum locks engaging. The students found themselves trapped with whatever had just caused the galaxy's most advanced bioscan system to suffer what appeared to be a complete existential crisis. Vex 9 approached the scanner with the careful movements of someone who had just realized their routine. Tuesday had become significantly less routine. The display continued cycling through impossible readouts, genetic markers, anomalous evolutionary indicators, paradoxical threat assessment, calculating. Professor, called out Kess, a young centaurian whose 4 arms gestured in 4 different directions of confusion. What kind of species breaks a scanning system? The kind that shouldn't exist, Vex 9 replied, studying the readouts with growing fascination rather than fear. According to this data, the sample contains genetic markers from a classification that was removed from our databases millennia ago. The scanner suddenly stopped its frantic cycling and displayed a single clear readout. Earthborn Detected Emergency Protocol. 77 Alpha. Shaitum. Maintain containment, awaiting security. Clearance for sterilization procedures. The classroom fell silent, except for the persistent humming of containment fields and the distant sound of what might have been security drones approaching through the facility's corridors. Earthborn, whispered Thrix, her multiple limbs suddenly very still. But that's impossible. Earth was destroyed in the Third Expansion War. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows a lot of things, Vex 9 observed, with the dry tone of someone whose morning had just become infinitely more interesting. The question now is whether what everyone knows is actually true. The security drone's approach grew louder, and the emergency lighting continued its hypnotic red pulse. Somewhere in the facility's depths, automated systems were calculating threat assessments and containment strategies for something that, according to official Galactic records, had been extinct for 3,000 years. The students sat in their seats, surrounded by quantum locks and emergency protocols, staring at a tissue sample that had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about galactic history. And in the growing chaos, nobody noticed that one particular student, sitting quietly in the back row, had gone very, very still. Security Chief Korath arrived with the subtle grace of a meteor impact, his massive Ursoid frame filling the doorway as quantum locks disengaged to admit him. Behind him followed someone who looked like they had wandered out of a philosophy lecture and into a crisis situation by accident. Dr. Helix, Korath announced in a voice that suggested he regularly ate smaller species for breakfast. Specializes in extinct civilization mythology. Apparently, your little classroom experiment has triggered protocols that reference his area of expertise. Dr. Helix adjusted his optical enhancers and peered at the still flashing scanner with the expression of someone who had spent decades studying things that were supposed to be safely theoretical. His elongated Etherian features twitched with what might have been excitement or terror. With his species, the distinction was often academic. Fascinating, Helix murmured, approaching the containment field. I haven't seen a 7-7 alpha activation since the theoretical simulations during my doctoral research. What exactly does 7-7 alpha mean? Demanded Nexar. his three eyes now focused with laser intensity on the newcomers. Korath's expression suggested he was debating whether to answer the question or simply evacuate everyone and ask questions later. It means we're dealing with something that the Galactic Safety Commission classified as an extinction-level threat to civilized space. But the sample is microscopic, Kess pointed out, her four arms gesturing helplessly. How dangerous can tissue fragments be? That depends, Dr. Helix said, pulling up holographic displays that made several students gasp. On what species those fragments came from? The hologram showed a three-dimensional map of known space, with various sectors highlighted in different threat colors. Most of the galaxy glowed in comfortable blues and greens, indicating stable, civilized regions. A few areas pulsed yellow for caution zones. And then there was a single sector, marked in pulsing crimson, that simply read, sterilized, no entry. The Sol system, Dr. Helix announced with academic satisfaction. Completely obliterated during the Third Expansion War, according to official records. The entire sector was quarantined after reports of unusual resistance patterns. Zephyr Cole shifted uncomfortably, his gaseous form taking on worried hues. You mean the primitives actually fought back? Oh, they did more than fight back, Helix continued, clearly warming to his subject. According to the mythology archives, which, I should note, are classified at levels that require 3 different clearances to access, the species from Sol 3 displayed what our military analysts called adaptive strategic pathology. Could you translate that into language the rest of us can understand? Thrix asked, her multiple limbs tapping nervously. They were very good at killing things that tried to kill them first, Korath supplied helpfully. Disturbingly good. The hologram shifted to display what looked like tactical reports, though the text was heavily redacted. What remained visible painted a picture that contradicted everything the students had learned about galactic expansion. The official story, Dr. Helix explained, is that the Sol system contained a primitive species that posed no significant threat to galactic civilization. Standard pacification protocols were implemented, the system was successfully integrated, and everyone lived happily ever after. And the unofficial story? Vex9 inquired, their crystalline form refracting the hologram's light in patterns that suggested deep unease. Helix's optical enhancers glinted. The unofficial story is that a single species from one planet managed to inflict casualties on 7 different galactic fleets, develop countermeasures to weapons they'd never seen before, and disappear so completely that we had to invent an entire cover story about destroying their system just to explain why nobody could find them. The scanner chose that moment to emit another series of frantic beeps, displaying new information that made Korath's fur stand on end. Genetic analysis, complete match probability, 99.7% species. Designation, Sol 3 variant classification. Status, presumed extinct actual status. Error, conflicting data. Presumed extinct, Thrix repeated slowly. But if they're presumed extinct, why does the scanner have genetic markers to compare against? The question hung in the air like a particularly uncomfortable truth that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Because, Dr. Helix said quietly, somewhere in our databases, we still have records of what they actually were. Not the sanitized version we teach in schools, but the real classification data. Korath moved closer to the scanner, his security instincts clearly engaged. Show me the full genetic profile. The scanner hesitated, or at least that's how it appeared. For several seconds, it displayed nothing but processing indicators. Then, slowly, a comprehensive biological analysis began scrolling across the screen. What they saw challenged every assumption about evolutionary development that galactic science had established over millennia. That can't be right, Kess whispered. Those adaptation markers, They suggest a species that evolved under multiple different environmental pressures simultaneously. Look at the neural complexity indices, added Zephyr Cole, his gaseous form stabilizing as intellectual curiosity overcame panic. They're off the charts. And the redundancy systems, Thrix pointed out, her information synthesis training kicking in. Multiple backup organs, enhanced healing factors, cognitive flexibility parameters that exceed theoretical maximums. Dr. Helix nodded grimly. Now you understand why 7-7 alpha protocols exist. The species from Sol 3 weren't just resistant to conventional pacification methods, they were biologically designed to survive anything the galaxy could throw at them. But they're gone now, Nexar said, though his voice carried less conviction than his words. The system was sterilized. You said so yourself. I said that was the official story, Helix corrected. The mythology department deals with what actually happened, not what we tell first-year students. Korath's communication device chirped with an incoming priority message. His expression grew steadily grimmer as he read. New orders from Galactic Command, he announced. Full facility lockdown is now indefinite. No one enters or leaves until a specialized containment team arrives. How long will that take? Vex 9 asked. For a 7-7 alpha situation? 3 days minimum. They need to assemble the team from across the galaxy. The students exchanged glances that suggested they were beginning to grasp the magnitude of their situation. They were locked in a classroom with what appeared to be genetic material from a species so dangerous that the galaxy's most advanced civilization had spent 3,000 years pretending it didn't exist. And somewhere in the facility's databases, automated systems were calculating whether the safest solution might be to sterilize everything within a 50-kilometer radius and start fresh. Professor Helix, came a quiet voice from the back of the room. What if they weren't actually extinct? Everyone turned to look at the student who had spoken, the same one who had remained unusually still during the initial crisis. The question seemed innocent enough, but something in the way they asked it made the air feel several degrees colder. What do you mean? Helix replied carefully. I mean, the student Oy continued with unsettling calm. What if the cover story about destroying their system was just that? A cover story. What if they just disappeared? The scanner erupted into another frenzy of activity, as if responding to the question itself. The student in the back row stood up with the fluid grace of someone who had been pretending to be something they weren't for far too long. What had seemed like typical academic posture revealed itself as carefully controlled movement, and what the others had taken for quiet attentiveness now looked more like predatory patience. The scanner isn't malfunctioning, they said conversationally, removing what appeared to be some kind of biomasking device from behind their ear. It's working exactly as designed. The problem is that it's scanning something it was never supposed to encounter in a classroom setting. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. Features that had seemed generically compatible with a dozen different species suddenly resolved into something distinctly other. Not alien in the way the rest of the class was alien, but alien in a way that made everyone's evolutionary alarm systems start screaming warnings. Zephyr Cole's gaseous form flickered between colors that suggested his species had no adequate emotional response for the current situation. Human, the student supplied helpfully. Though I've been going by Alex for the past 3 semesters. Amazing how easy it is to blend in when everyone believes your species is extinct. Korath's hand moved toward his weapon, with the instinctive response of someone whose ancestors had survived by recognizing threats quickly. The human, Alex, noticed the movement and smiled in a way that was probably meant to be reassuring, but achieved the opposite effect. I wouldn't recommend that, Alex said mildly. Not because I'm particularly dangerous in a fight, but because shooting me would trigger about 17 different contingency protocols that would make your current situation significantly more complicated. Dr. Helix adjusted his optical enhancers frantically, as if hoping different magnification might make the impossible scene make sense. But the genetic scans, the extinction records, the sterilization of the Sol system. Oh, the Sol system was definitely sterilized, Alex confirmed, settling back against their desk with casual ease. Very thoroughly, in fact. Scorched Earth doesn't begin to describe what your fleets did to our homeworlds. Then how are you here? Thrix demanded, her multiple limbs gesturing in what appeared to be several different kinds of confusion simultaneously. Alex's expression grew thoughtful, as if considering how much truth the room could handle. Do you know what humans are really good at? Not the propaganda version you get in xenobiology classes, but the actual evolutionary advantages that made your ancestors nervous enough to glass an entire solar system? The scanner continued its electronic seizure, now displaying readouts that scrolled past too quickly for anyone to fully process. Emergency systems throughout the facility were clearly having heated discussions with each other about appropriate responses. Adaptation, Alex continued, without waiting for an answer. Not just biological adaptation, that's amateur hour. Humans adapt behaviorally, technologically, socially, psychologically. We adapt to things that would drive other species extinct or insane. So you survived the bombardment? Kess asked, her 4 arms now perfectly still. Some of us survived. Some of us had already left, and some of us... Alex paused, seeming to weigh their words carefully. Had been preparing for the possibility of galactic contact going badly for quite some time before your fleets arrived. The implications hung in the air like toxic gas. Korath was the first to vocalize what everyone was thinking. You're saying humans had advance warning of the invasion? I'm saying humans had been watching galactic civilization for centuries before you officially discovered us, Alex replied. Do you really think a species that developed interplanetary travel in less than a century couldn't figure out faster-than-light reconnaissance? Vex 9's crystalline form shifted patterns in ways that suggested deep disturbance. That would mean human technology was far more advanced than our initial assessments indicated. Your initial assessments were based on what we wanted you to see, Alex said, with the patient tone of someone explaining basic concepts to particularly slow students. Amazing how easy it is to appear primitive when your observers are looking for confirmation of their own superiority. The scanner suddenly stopped its frantic cycling and displayed a new message that made everyone in the room take an involuntary step backward. Biometric analysis. Complete subject, human variant, designation unknown threat. Assessment, calculating. Warning, subject displaying stress indicators. Consistent with imminent behavioral shift, recommend immediate evacuation. Behavioral shift? Nexar's 3 eyes focused on Alex with newfound wariness. Alex laughed, and the sound was nothing like the casual academic they had been pretending to be for 3 semesters. The scanner thinks I'm about to become violent. Galactic technology has some interesting assumptions about human psychology. Are you? Korath asked bluntly. About to become violent? That depends entirely on whether anyone in this room decides to do something stupid, Alex replied. I've spent years studying your species, your cultures, your military doctrines, your political systems. I know exactly how each of you is likely to react to stress, and I know exactly how to respond to whatever you're planning. Dr. Helix found his voice, though it came out somewhat strangled. You've been studying us? Did you think we'd just roll over and die after your fleets left? Alex asked, with genuine curiosity. Humans don't do extinction very well. We do revenge, we do long-term planning, and we do infiltration. We've been in your schools, your governments, your military academies, your research facilities. The scanner erupted with new information. Alert. Additional human genetic markers detected in facility. Database probability. Multiple individuals present containment breach, likely initiating sterilization. Protocol's automated systems throughout the Kepler academic nexus began powering up with the ominous hum of weapons designed to deal with threats that conventional security couldn't handle. "How many of you are there?" Korath demanded. Alex checked their timepiece with the casual gesture of someone keeping track of an appointment. "In this facility? Just me at the moment. In the galaxy as a whole?" They shrugged. Enough. The lights dimmed as power was redirected to the facility's final option defense systems. Somewhere in the depths of the building, containment barriers were being replaced with sterilization chambers. "You're remarkably calm for someone who's about to be vaporized along with the rest of us," Thrix observed. "That's because," Alex said, standing up again and walking toward the sealed exit with complete confidence, "I'm not the one who should be worried about the next few minutes." They placed their hand on the quantum lock that had sealed them all inside. The lock, designed to withstand everything short of stellar-level energy output, clicked open like a simple door latch. "After all," Alex continued conversationally, "humans have had 3,000 years to study galactic technology. We've gotten quite good at it." The sterilization countdown reached 10 seconds as alarms throughout the facility began their final warnings. Alex looked back at the room full of beings who represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization and smiled with genuine warmth. "Class dismissed." The sterilization countdown hit 0. Nothing happened. Alex stood by the open doorway, checking their timepiece again, with the satisfied expression of someone whose schedule was proceeding exactly as planned. The facility's weapons systems had powered up, aimed, calculated optimal annihilation angles, and then stopped. "Curious," Vex 9 observed, their crystalline form shifting into patterns that suggested they were experiencing something approaching amusement. "It appears our defensive systems have developed a sudden case of pacifism." Korath frantically worked his security controls, getting nothing but error messages and helpful suggestions that he tried turning the systems off and on again. "This is impossible. These weapons don't just malfunction." "They're not malfunctioning," Alex said cheerfully. "They're just following orders from someone with higher clearance than you have." Dr. Helix looked from Alex to Vex 9 and back again, his enhanced optical sensors picking up details that the others had missed. "Instructor, your stress indicators haven't changed at all during this entire crisis. Most crystallines show at least some structural variation under extreme duress." Vex 9's form rippled in what might have been the geological equivalent of laughter. "Observant, Dr. Helix. Though I suppose after 30 years of studying mythological civilizations, you've developed an eye for inconsistencies." The truth settled over the room like a heavy blanket that no one wanted to be under. "You knew," Thrix whispered, her multiple limbs trembling with the effort of processing betrayal by mathematics. "You knew what that sample was before you put it in the scanner." "Of course I knew," Vex 9 replied with the same methodical patience they'd shown all semester. "I've been collaborating with human researchers for the better part of 2 decades. Did you think Alex was the only one who'd figured out how to forge academic credentials?" Nexar's 3 eyes performed a complex dance of confusion and rage. "But you're a respected xenobiology professor. You've published papers on species classification." "I've published papers on what the galactic academic establishment wanted to hear about species classification," Vex 9 corrected. "There's a significant difference." Korath's fur was standing at angles that suggested his worldview was undergoing catastrophic structural failure. "So this entire demonstration was a controlled experiment," Alex supplied helpfully. "We wanted to see exactly how galactic civilization's finest educational institution would react when confronted with evidence that their greatest triumph was actually their biggest lie. Zephyrcoal had shifted through so many panic colors that he was approaching ultraviolet. But the emergency protocols, the containment procedures, the sterilization countdown, all genuine, Vex 9 confirmed. We simply ensured that cooler heads would prevail before anyone got unnecessarily vaporized. Dr. Helix adjusted his optical enhancers one more time, as if hoping different settings might reveal a version of reality that made more sense. How long has this collaboration been going on? Long enough, Alex said, settling into the instructor's chair with casual authority. Long enough to map your military installations, decode your communication protocols, infiltrate your government databases, and document every single war crime your civilization committed during the so-called pacification campaigns. The scanner, apparently deciding that conventional threat assessments were inadequate for the current situation, began displaying philosophical questions. Is extinction truly permanent? Define civilization. Calculate moral debt of genocide error. Insufficient processing power for ethical paradox. The real question, Vex 9 continued, is what happens next. You've all witnessed evidence that challenges everything you've been taught about galactic history, human capabilities, and institutional trustworthiness. Kess managed to find her voice, though it came out smaller than usual. Are you going to kill us? Alex and Vex 9 exchanged glances that suggested they'd anticipated this question. That depends, Alex said thoughtfully, on whether you're capable of learning from this experience. Learning what? Korath demanded. That maybe, Vex 9 said with crystalline clarity. The species your civilization tried to exterminate weren't the primitive, violent savages your history books claim they were. And maybe, Alex added with a smile that contained absolutely no warmth, the real question isn't whether humans are dangerous to galactic civilization. The scanner's display flickered one final time before settling on a new readout. Threat Assessment Revision. Primary danger to galactic stability, galactic civilization itself. Recommendation: fundamental systemic reform. Alternative: await inevitable collapse. The real question, Alex concluded, standing and walking towards the door, is whether galactic civilization is dangerous to itself. The students sat in stunned silence as their instructor and their classmate, beings they'd trusted, learned from, and completely misunderstood, prepared to leave them with the wreckage of everything they'd believed about their place in the universe. Wait, Thrix called out as Alex reached the doorway. What are we supposed to do with this information? Alex paused, considering the question with the same seriousness they'd once shown when discussing assignment deadlines. Whatever you think is right, they said finally. Just remember that somewhere out there, humans are watching how your generation chooses to handle the truth. And with that, they disappeared into the corridor, leaving behind a room full of galactic civilization's future leaders to contemplate the uncomfortable possibility that they'd been preparing for the wrong future entirely. The Kepler Academic Nexus returned to its normal operations within hours. Official reports cited a minor equipment malfunction during a routine demonstration. Students returned to their dormitories with stories about a boring Tuesday that had gotten slightly out of hand. But late at night, when the facility's recyclers hummed their mechanical lullabies, some of those students found themselves staring at star charts and wondering which of those distant lights might be watching them back. After all, the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their capacity for violence or their talent for survival. It was their patience